At 78, Rob Reiner finally tells the truth about Carroll O'Connor. Rob Reiner was born on March 6, 1947 in the Bronx, New York, right into the beating heart of comedy itself. His father, Carroll Reiner, was already a towering figure in show business, writing, performing, and shaping the very DNA of American television. His mother, Estelle, was an actress and singer. So from the moment Rob could walk, he was surrounded by laughter, scripts, and bright studio lights. Most kids grew up playing ball in the street. Rob grew up backstage at the Dick Van Dyke Show. He watched his father build jokes out of thin air, turn awkward silences into punchlines, and make audiences feel something. That's where Rob learned the most important rule of storytelling. Truth always wins. Not the polished truth, the messy truth. The kind that makes people laugh, cringe, or even argue. He didn't know it yet, but that same rule would define his entire career, and one day lead him straight into a storm called All in the Family. But before that storm hit, Reiner's path had to cross with a man who couldn't have been more different. By 1971, America was changing. Fast. The Vietnam War, civil rights, women's liberation, generation wars. Every dinner table was divided. And television? It was still pretending everything was fine. That's when Norman Lear decided to blow the doors off polite sitcoms and hold up a mirror to the real world. He created All in the Family, a show so raw, so honest, that CBS executives almost refused to air it. At the center of it all stood Carroll O'Connor as Archie Bunker, the stubborn, loud, working-class father stuck in an America he no longer understood. Opposite him, Rob Reiner as Michael Meathead Stivic, the idealistic liberal son-in-law who questioned everything. It was lightning in a bottle. Two actors from completely different worlds, forced to embody America's biggest cultural war. O'Connor was the old-school intellectual, a trained stage actor from the University of Montana, classically educated with a fierce commitment to realism. Reiner was the Hollywood kid, young, confident, with a comedic instinct sharper than a razor. And when the cameras rolled, sparks flew. On set, O'Connor was meticulous, rewriting lines, dissecting every pause, making sure Archie wasn't just a cartoon. He once said, "If people aren't uncomfortable, we're not doing our job." Reiner, meanwhile, thrived on spontaneity. He'd throw in quick reactions, little improvisations that made each scene feel alive. Their dynamic was magnetic. You could feel the tension through the screen. Archie's old-world stubbornness, Mike's relentless idealism. To the audience, it looked like hatred. But behind the camera, something very different was happening. Reiner would later admit, "I learned more from Carroll O'Connor than from any acting teacher in my life." Because Carroll wasn't playing a bigot. He was holding up a mirror, exposing America's flaws while making people laugh at their own contradictions. Still, the world didn't see it that way. Fans started sending letters, warning Reiner to stop disrespecting Archie. Some even thought the two actors genuinely despised each other. In truth, they'd often finish shooting a brutal argument scene, and then share coffee and jokes right after. Reiner said those moments taught him what art really meant. You don't have to agree with someone to create something powerful together. But the deeper their characters' feud grew, the harder it became to separate fact from fiction. Rumors spread, stories about fights, politics, egos, and Reiner, he stayed silent for years, until now, because decades later, at 78, he finally revealed what really went on behind the laughter, and why Carroll O'Connor was nothing like the man you thought he was. There's one moment in All in the Family that still gives people chills, the episode called Two's a Crowd. It starts simple. Archie and Mike get locked in a basement. No audience laughter, no fast cuts, just two men trapped in silence, forced to face each other. Now, what most people don't know is that much of that scene wasn't scripted. Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner went off-book, and what they created in that moment was raw, painful, and shockingly real. Archie starts off blustering, ranting, calling Mike names, but as the hours drag on, his voice cracks. He starts talking about his childhood, his father, his regrets, and for the first time, the audience sees something new, that all of Archie's hate, all his anger, came from fear. When O'Connor said those lines, it wasn't acting. He was digging deep into human truth. Rob Reiner later said, "I was supposed to respond, but I couldn't. Because I wasn't Mike anymore. I was just sitting across from this man, hearing him break down. That silence, that pause you see in the scene, it wasn't written. It just happened. And that moment, that tiny slice of honesty, turned All in the Family from a sitcom into something historic. People didn't just laugh anymore. They felt." Reiner called that day his real education. He said, "Carroll taught me that comedy isn't about jokes. It's about truth. It's about holding up a mirror and saying, 'This is us,' even if it hurts to look." That's what made the show unforgettable. Because while everyone else was trying to escape reality, these two men dragged it right into America's living room. But what the audience didn't see was that the same fire, the same creative friction that made the show brilliant, was also starting to push things behind the scenes to the breaking point. Success is a strange thing. It doesn't just open doors, it changes the air in the room. By the mid-70s, All in the Family was the most talked about show in America. Every Sunday night, millions tuned in to laugh, argue, and feel uncomfortable. And they loved it. But behind the curtain, the pressure was building. Carroll O'Connor was a perfectionist. He didn't just act Archie, he lived the responsibility of portraying him truthfully. He'd challenge scripts, rewrite lines, and sometimes clash with Norman Lear, the show's creator. He believed Archie wasn't just a bigot, he was a product of his time, a symbol of the fears people didn't want to admit they had. Lear didn't always agree. He wanted Archie's ignorance to be the joke. O'Connor wanted his humanity to be the lesson. And right there, stuck between those two creative giants, was Rob Reiner. Reiner was the bridge, the son-in-law both on-screen and off-screen. He loved Carroll's dedication, but he also respected Lear's vision. And when the tension grew, Reiner felt every ounce of it. The tabloids smelled blood. Rumors spread that O'Connor was difficult, that he argued with everyone, even Reiner. Headlines read, "Tension on the bunker set," and fans believed it. After all, Archie and Meathead were always at each other's throats. Wasn't it obvious the actors were too? But the truth was completely different. Reiner later said, "We argued all the time, sure, but we argued because we cared. We fought about truth, not ego." In fact, Carroll and Rob shared a deep respect. Even when they disagreed, they'd go at it over a line, a pause, a gesture, and then eat lunch together, laughing about baseball or books. One crew member remembered a day when O'Connor and Reiner had a huge debate about a script rewrite. Everyone thought it was about to explode. Instead, Carroll walked over, put a hand on Rob's shoulder, and said softly, "You were right, kid. Let's do it your way." That was Carroll. Intense, passionate, but humble enough to listen. Still, fame has a way of twisting perception. The more the show succeeded, the more people believed the myth that Archie and Meathead were real. Reiner couldn't go anywhere without someone shouting, "Hey Meathead, you tell that old man what's what." He'd laugh, but deep down it bothered him, because the world couldn't separate the act from the art. And that misunderstanding, that blurred line between who they played and who they were, became one of the biggest regrets of Reiner's life. He said, "People thought I hated Carroll, but what they didn't know is, I loved him. He made me better. He made me braver. He made me care about the truth." And years later, when the camera stopped rolling and the spotlight faded, that truth would come full circle, in a way that left Reiner emotional even decades later. For years, people thought Carroll O'Connor was just Archie Bunker, a grumpy, close-minded loudmouth. But behind the camera, Carroll was the opposite. He was quiet, thoughtful, obsessed with detail. He'd show up on set early, sit alone with the script, and dissect every line like a surgeon. Rob Reiner remembers walking in one morning, coffee in hand, and seeing Carroll scribbling notes in the margins. He asked, "Carroll, what are you doing?" O'Connor looked up and said, "I'm trying to find the truth in him. Archie's not evil. He's scared. If I don't find that truth, no one will believe him." That one sentence hit Reiner like lightning, because up until that point, he'd seen acting as performance, timing, rhythm, getting the laugh. But Carroll saw it as surgery on the human condition. Reiner said years later, "That's when I realized comedy isn't about being funny. It's about being honest," and that lesson stayed with him for life. You can trace it through every film Reiner ever directed afterward. In Stand By Me, he showed how childhood innocence fades. In A Few Good Men, he asked what truth is worth fighting for. Even in When Harry Met Sally, he explored how honesty can destroy or save a relationship. Those weren't just movies. They were echoes of what Carroll O'Connor taught him. That real storytelling makes people uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it matters. Carroll wasn't a teacher in the traditional sense. He never lectured. He taught by example, by being the work. Reiner once said, "If you watched Carroll act, you could learn more in a day than from 4 years at NYU." And off-camera, Carroll was nothing like the character that made him famous. He was a reader, a thinker, a man who quoted philosophers between takes. He'd talk to the crew about Dostoevsky, about how people hide behind anger because they're afraid of being forgotten. Reiner said those talks stayed with him, not because they were intellectual, but because they were human. He said, "Carroll reminded me that everyone, even Archie Bunker, just wants to be understood." That was the real gift O'Connor gave him. Not fame, not technique, but empathy. The kind that shapes everything you create and everything you are. But years after the cameras stopped rolling, as time went on and the world moved past All in the Family, the rumors and myths never stopped. And for decades, Rob stayed quiet. Until one day, at 78 years old, he finally decided to tell the truth. When Rob Reiner sat down for an interview not long ago, no one expected what came next. He'd been asked about All in the Family hundreds of times before, but this time, something felt different. The years had softened his voice, but not his conviction. He leaned forward and said, "You know, people always thought Carroll and I didn't get along. They thought we were like Archie and Mike in real life. We weren't. We were brothers in the work." For the first time, he spoke openly about what Carroll O'Connor really meant to him. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told the truth, the kind that makes you pause and listen. Carroll wasn't Archie, Reiner said. He was one of the kindest, most intelligent men I've ever known. He didn't just act, he believed in what art could do. He went on to say that O'Connor changed the way he saw people, that behind every stubborn opinion or angry face, there's usually pain or fear or love that got buried somewhere along the way. And that's why, decades later, Reiner still feels protective of Carroll's legacy, because the world never really understood him. Reiner said, "People confused the man with the role. They saw Archie Bunker and assumed that was Carroll. But the truth, he hated everything Archie stood for. That's why he played him so well. He was trying to make America look at itself." He paused, long enough for the silence to feel heavy, then added softly, "I wish people could have seen him the way I did. He was brilliant, gentle, and he believed that television could change hearts. He proved it." At that moment, Reiner's eyes started to well up, not because of regret, but because of gratitude. He said, "Carroll gave me more than anyone in this business. He showed me how to care about the work and about people. He was my mentor, my friend, my teacher." And then came the line that broke everyone watching. "If I could talk to him now, I'd just say, thank you." That's the kind of truth that doesn't trend, doesn't make headlines, but it's the kind that sticks. Because it's not about gossip. It's about two men, from two generations, who found common ground in the one place where it truly mattered, the love of the craft. And for Reiner, that truth was worth waiting half a lifetime to tell. But even as he finally set the record straight, Reiner's reflection revealed something even deeper, something about legacy, about how the people who challenge us the most often leave the biggest mark on our souls. When the lights of All in the Family finally dimmed, most people thought that was the end of an era. But for Rob Reiner, it was only the beginning of something deeper. He carried Carroll O'Connor's lessons everywhere, into every movie, every decision, every line of dialogue he ever wrote or directed. To him, it wasn't about chasing fame or fortune, it was about chasing truth. You can see Carroll's fingerprints on everything Reiner touched. When A Few Good Men hit theaters, people called it a courtroom thriller. But for Rob, it was something more. It was a test of courage, honesty, and power. He once said, "If Carroll taught me anything, it's that real courage doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing your ground when the truth hurts." Think about that famous line, "You can't handle the truth. It became iconic. But to Reiner, it was more than a movie quote. It was a reflection of his mentor. Because Carroll O'Connor handled the truth every single day, through humor, through storytelling, through uncomfortable conversations that made people think. And that's what made both men timeless. They weren't afraid to ruffle feathers. They didn't chase applause. They chased impact. Even now, decades later, you can feel it. Every time an actor dares to make you uncomfortable, every time a director tells a story that forces you to question your own beliefs, that's their legacy, alive and pulsing beneath the surface of modern Hollywood. But Rob's connection to Carroll didn't end when the show wrapped. In quiet moments, he still hears his mentor's voice, calm, measured, guiding him. Especially during tough times, when Rob's films flopped, and there were a few, he'd remember Carroll's words. Art isn't about success, it's about courage. That's what kept him grounded. That's what kept him going when people said he was past his prime. Because deep down, Reiner knew. He wasn't just carrying his father's legacy anymore. He was carrying Carroll's too. And that kind of inheritance, the kind that lives in your heart instead of your wallet, never fades. But as the years rolled on, something else began to dawn on Rob. Something no one in Hollywood ever likes to face. The spotlight moves on. The applause fades. And what's left is what you gave to people while you had the chance. Today, at 78, Rob Reiner isn't just another Hollywood veteran looking back. He's one of the few who lived through every era, from black and white television to digital streaming, and still remembers why any of it matters. When asked recently what success means to him now, he didn't talk about awards, fame, or money. He said, "It's about the people who shaped me. The ones who believed in me before I did." And then he paused. The interviewer waited, expecting a name like his father, Carl Reiner. But Rob just smiled softly and said, "Carroll O'Connor." Because for him, Carroll wasn't just a co-star. He was the man who showed him how to be human in an industry that often forgets what that word means. Reiner said, "I owe my sense of empathy to him. My sense of humor too, but mostly my heart. Carroll made me understand that stories aren't about heroes or villains. They're about people trying to do their best, even when they don't know how." That's why, when Reiner talks about legacy, it's never about himself. He doesn't want to be remembered just for The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, or When Harry Met Sally. He wants to be remembered for the moments that made people feel something real. He once said, "The best compliment I ever got wasn't from a critic. It was from a fan who told me that one of my movies helped them forgive someone." That's the kind of art Carroll believed in. That's what I want to leave behind. And maybe that's why his story, and Carroll's, still resonates today. Because beneath the fame and the jokes and the old TV reruns lies something timeless. Two men who dared to believe that laughter could change the world. Reiner looked into the camera, voice cracking slightly, and said, "I loved him. Not just as an actor, as a man. He made me better. And if that's the only thing I ever achieved, it's enough." The room fell silent. No music, no fancy lighting, just a man at peace with his truth. That's how you know a story is real, when it doesn't need anything extra to make you feel it. Because the truth, the one Rob Reiner waited a lifetime to tell, is simple. Carroll O'Connor wasn't just Archie Bunker. He was the heartbeat behind the laughter. And for Rob Reiner, he'll always be the soul behind the man he became. And that is the part of Hollywood they never show you. The moments that happen when the cameras stop and the truth finally walks in. But the real question is, how many legends like Carroll O'Connor are still out there, waiting for someone brave enough to tell their story?